Name sound familiar? Okay. He is a famous forensic scientist and a professor at the University of New Haven, right here in Connecticut. Right? He's getting older. I'm not sure if he retired yet, but I think he's actually still teaching. But he worked on the trial of the century. And that was the O.J. Simpson case in 1995. All right? So for anyone who is, I would say, like 40 years and older, this, like, we remember this. Okay? We remember the white Bronco chase. So this was the days before streaming, and so we all had our TVs, turned on to the news, and we're just watching this really slow chase, right? And then the whole country was just, like watching this trial all the way, that famous image, right? If the glove don't fit, you must acquit. Like this is, like we remember this, and then the acquittal, which was just like, people erupted in celebration. People were flabbergasted at like, how, really? Right? This was insane, right? And the reason, because I realize for some of the youth here, they'll be like, who's O.J. Simpson? Like, did he invent orange juice or something? No. O.J. Simpson was like a famous, like Hall of Fame level football player, okay? Like, all the way from college, all the way to pros, like super famous, and then retired and became a movie star, right? And so, like, huge, right? And so when he was accused of murder, it's like, what? Not O.J., right? And so this was huge. There's actually been multiple documentaries made about him and the case. The most famous one was O.J. Made in America. That came out about 10 years ago in 2016, and it actually won an Oscar. Okay, so like this, even though this happened in 95, even into the 2010s, people are still talking about it. Okay, and so we are in part 4 of our 6-part Isaiah series, and today in this part, God gets put on trial. Right? Not exactly, but like it's kind of a trial for God. Right? And so, we're in chapters 40 to 48. You could probably take that image down, go to just blank slide now. We don't need to see that. Going forward, just like if you're watching this online, it's just like right here. It's like, why is OJ still up there? We're in Isaiah now, right? So we're in chapters 40 to 48, and let's just back up a bit and review what has happened so far, right? So far, Isaiah has prophesied that Assyria would conquer Israel, the northern kingdom, and so Isaiah started his, like, I guess you call it a career as the prophet, right? He started his career in 740 BC, and Assyria falls. Israel falls to Assyria in 722 BC, about 18 years later, right? And so one of the things to understand is that in Isaiah, this is not something he wrote like over a weekend, right? This is many years of him speaking prophecy, and it's stuff that's being written down, okay? So it happens 18 years later. Isaiah has also prophesied that Babylon would then conquer Judah, the southern kingdom, right? And Jerusalem fell, and this happens in 586 BC. The numbers aren't important, but unless you're a numbers person, you're doing this math really quickly in your head, that's over 150 years after Isaiah started to prophesy. So you're like, wait a minute, right? And then Jewish tradition says that Isaiah is martyred by King Manasseh, who is one of the kings of Judah, between 697 and 642 BC. Right? And so you're like, whoa, because I know you're doing all the number stuff in your head right now, right? That means Isaiah died before the prophecy of Babylon came true. right? But now when we look at chapter 40 and on, right, in the book of Isaiah, it's written kind of with the point of view and a voice that looks back on the fall of Judah, right? And so it's writing in a way that's, oh yeah, this already happened, but it hasn't, right? This is way in the future. And so how does that work, right? It's like, because Isaiah is writing this like as if this already happened, but it didn't. Like this is 150 years later, right? So what's going on, right? So some people think that Isaiah is just writing it this way. Like he's just writing in the voice of like, yeah, this already happened because it's going to happen, so I'm just going to write this way, right? Other scholars think that this part of Isaiah is actually written by Isaiah's disciples, not Isaiah himself. And so like Isaiah wrote like the first half, he has all his scrolls and his disciples take those, and then afterwards, like way later, when this actually happened, they're looking at it and being like, oh my goodness, like Isaiah, like it came true. And now they're writing the rest, kind of looking back on it, right? And this is actually not uncommon, right? In the Bible, sometimes you have this, right? Moses is attributed to have written the book of Deuteronomy, but he clearly did not write chapter 34 because that's a chapter about his death, right? And so like he's not writing that one, right? And so this is not uncommon, and now you might be sitting there going like, you said there was a trial. This is boring, right? Okay. I just want to make sure we understand just like why the voice and why it feels like it's in the past when it's not, right? Just for some of you who are like reading ahead and just like, I have a question, right? So I'm answering that ahead of time, right? So yes, there is a trial. It happens in chapters 41 to 47. First, let's take a look at chapter 40, okay? And so I want to read verse 1 to 2 for you. It says, Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for. Right? So remember, the Israelites were exiled to Babylon for 70 years, and then they returned to Jerusalem with Ezra and Nehemiah, right? So we actually have already done Ezra and Nehemiah in our series, but this is what's going on, right? And so they get to go home. This is a really big deal, right? So like the people who are in Babylon have been there for decades, and they get to go home, right? And then in chapter 40, you have this famous messianic verse, right? In verse 3 about John the Baptist and Jesus. Like we look back on this and we know, oh yeah, that's what it's saying, right? But it says this in verse 3. A voice of one calling, in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God, right? This is prophesying what John the Baptist is going to do and prepare the way for the Lord. And so verse 1 to 3 is basically saying, be comforted, right? The exile is over, and now be the people of God again, right? And serve God faithfully. That's basically the message here, right? So we've got to remember where these prophecies have both like for the people who are hearing it originally, right? So they're hearing, be comforted, and then now, you're going to go back. You're in Babylon now, but you're going to go back to your homeland, to the promised land, to Jerusalem, right? But the prophecy also has like a meaning for us today as we see this, and we're like, oh, this is even bigger than that. This is bigger than like the Jewish people coming back to their home. This is about all of us and something bigger there. Okay, and so when they heard this, they were excited, right? Everything was good. They just listened and obeyed and just go forward, right? And then so at the end of verse 20, chapter 40, verse 27, it says, "Why do you complain, Jacob?" That not literally Jacob, but like the people of Israel, right? "Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God?" And we are like, uh-oh, right? So God tells them, be comforted, like you're going back, and yet the people are complaining. And this is kind of how we get into this trial, if you will, in chapters 41 to 47, okay? And so here we go, chapter 41 to 47, this little trial we have, right? So basically the accusation against God, right? Like the people's accusation against God is basically this, that God has ignored us, right? We've been here for 70 years. God has ignored us. God has abandoned us, right? We were exiled to Babylon, and then we're just here. God has ignored us. God has abandoned us. And maybe the gods of the Babylonians are actually stronger than God. Because, well, they won, and we all got exiled. So maybe God is not strong, and it's the Babylonian gods who are stronger. And I was reading this, and I was like, wow, yeah, there's like what's going on back then, but I thought this is really relevant today. Because don't we believers, right, often feel that God ignores us and God has abandoned us? And our faith, oftentimes, we are kind of doing our thing, and we have obstacles in our lives and troubles, and we go to God, and often we feel the same way. God has abandoned us, God ignores us, and sometimes we feel that God is maybe not as strong as he says he is, and that our problems might be stronger. We'll never say that out loud because, we're Christians and we go to church. We don't say that, but we think it, we feel it, right? And the way we know we think it and feel it is when we do have this big obstacle or problem in our life, we don't go to God first. Because if we really believe, no, God is the greatest, God is the strong, we would go to God first and be like, God, like this. But we don't always do that. Often we do everything except go to God, right? We just try to solve it ourselves. We try to just bear it. We try to go to our friends and get a counsel from friends, right? We use AI to see, okay, what do you have to say? Like we go to everything. And what that says, like deep down, is we're saying, maybe God isn't as strong and big as the Babylonian gods, but the Babylonian gods for us is going to be all those other things, right? So I think that what's happening here is so relevant to what we are facing today, okay? And so that's the accusations against God, and what is God's response, right? God's response is first, it's like, hey, God didn't abandon his people. The exile was temporary judgment. In chapter 42, verse 24, it says, who handed Jacob over to become loot and Israel to the plunderers? Was it not the Lord against whom we have sinned? For they would not follow his ways. They did not obey his laws. Right? And so that's God's first response. Another response God gives is God always redeems. Right? In chapter 43, verse 1 and then 5, it says, but now this is what the Lord says. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bring your children from the east and gather you from the west. Right? God, even though, right, there is like the exile is temporary judgment, God always redeems. Right? Another response God gives is that only God can save. And so we see this in chapter 43, verse 11 to 13. And it says, I, even I, am the Lord, and apart from me there is no Savior. I have revealed and saved and proclaimed. I, and not some foreign god among you. You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, that I am God. Yes, and from ancient days I am he. No one can deliver out of my hand. When I act, who can reverse it? Right? That God is the only one who can save. And then another response is that God forgives. Chapter 43, verse 25. I, even I, am he who blots out your transgressions for my own sake and remembers your sins no more. I love that picture of forgiveness. It's not like for us, forgiveness is you have wronged me, and I'm saying it's okay. I forgive you. I wish you well. That's actually, when it comes to like forgiveness, if you want to know like biblically, what does that mean for us? It's for us to look at the person who has hurt us and genuinely and honestly and sincerely wishing them well. That's what forgiveness means. For God, it's bigger than that. Like for God, it is, like look, blots out, right? So it's almost like you have a piece of paper and it's like just a Sharpie that blots it out. And it's done in a way where you can't, like if it's not a PDF that you can then reverse and look at it, right? Like God, when God forgives you, it's as if it didn't happen. Like God doesn't like remember it, which is wild because that is a power we do not have. Even like when we forgive people, we remember what they did. And sometimes we have to kind of forgive them every day because like those feelings of anger and hurt come up again. And we're like, no, I'm going to choose forgiveness today, right? And that's what we should do, right? But we don't have the power to kind of forget what had happened. God does. When God forgives us, he blots it out. It's as if it didn't even happen, which if you think about that is incredible, and that should bring us so much joy. Okay, all right. God also responds by saying, God chooses, chapter 44, verse 1. But now listen, Jacob, my servant Israel, whom I have chosen, right? God chooses, right? So God chooses to forgive. God chooses to redeem and to save, right? And lastly, God also responds by saying that God will judge Babylon through Persia, okay? And that happens basically at chapter 46 and 47, right? And just like God uses Assyria, even though Assyria is not innocent, they're terrible, right? God uses Babylon, right, for his purposes, even though Babylon is not innocent as well. And eventually Babylon will also be judged, right? And so you see this on a historical level, right? You have the Assyrian Empire, which is in like Iraq, more like almost like central Iraq, right? They kind of start and they kind of come up and over and they attack, right? Eventually, the Babylonians are more in the southern, southeastern part of Iraq. They come up, conquer Assyria, and go over. And Persia eventually will rise up. And Persia actually is not from Iraq. They're more from Iran, right? Iranians are Persian, right? And so their empire comes up and they come through, right? So that's what we're seeing. And God is, Isaiah is prophesying this like throughout his time in Israel, saying like this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is what happens on a historical level. Okay? And so that's God responds in these ways. And so the second part is then the right response. So if God's if the exile was temporary judgment, and then God redeems, he forgives, all that kind of stuff, right? If that's that, the right response for the people should be one that there is no God like God, right? In chapters 44, verse 6 and 45, verse 5, it says, this is what the Lord says, Israel's King and Redeemer, the Lord Almighty, I am the first and I am the last. Apart from me, there is no God. And then in verse 45, verse 5, you kind of see that similar language. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God, right? And then so that first response from the people should be that there is no God like God. And the second one is to not be afraid, right? Chapter 44, verse 8. Do not tremble. Do not be afraid. Did I not proclaim this and foretell it long ago? You are my witnesses. Is there any God besides me? No, there is no other rock. I know not one. All right. And then the final response we should have, or the people should have, is to turn back to God. Right? In chapter 45, verse 22. Turn to me and be saved, all you ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. right? And so in this trial, you have like the accusations, God responds, and then there is okay, this is how God responds. This is the right way to respond to God. And so that's how God's people responded, right? They're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and we trust the Lord, and everybody goes back to Jerusalem, happy, all that kind of stuff, right? Right? That's what happens, right? Okay, let's take a look. Chapter 48, verse 1. Listen to this, you descendants of Jacob, you who are called by the name of Israel and come from the line of Judah, you who take oaths in the name of the Lord and invoke the God of Israel, but not in truth or righteousness. Oh, we were so close, right? And so what happens? No, what happens is Isaiah prophesies this, right? Like, remember in the beginning, it's be comforted. Like, your time in captivity and exile is over. We're going to go back. Now, be God's people, serve the Lord. And then they make these accusations, and Isaiah, responds, this is God's response, that kind of stuff. And then we find out that, oh no, right? The people basically reject God in this. So even though they do get to go home back to Jerusalem, they still reject the Lord. And this line, not in truth or righteousness, to me, this is a little bit haunting because, again, I look at Christians throughout history and I think, oh man, we're no different. We are no different, right? Like, it didn't say, oh, and the people of Israel then rebelled against the Lord and made the gods of Babylon their God. They didn't say that. That's not what happened. You know what? They called, they took oaths in the name of the Lord. So they continued that worship, but not in truth or righteousness. There's this I don't know, I think this happens to us, and it's understandable, though not a good thing, where sometimes we, especially for those of us as Christians who grew up in the church, where it's like, yeah, okay, God, and then something happens, and then we kind of accuse God, or just God, you didn't help me here, and we never renounce God. We never say, well, you know what? I'm going to become a witch now. Right? We don't go like that. But what happens is we're like, fine, I'll still do the church thing. I'll still be a Christian, but there's something has changed in us, and there's a bitterness toward God, and there's anger towards God that we never, and that's a natural, normal, human response if something like this happens, but we'd never actually bring it before God and say to God, God, this is how I feel because of this, and then work through that in our faith, which is what God calls us to do. We just kind of move on in that bitterness, right? In normal relationships, that's not good either, right? So if you have a friendship and one of your friends does something to you, right? It's easy for us to yeah, I forgive you. But then that friendship is never the same. And in fact, it's almost like you're not friends with that person anymore. You don't like them anymore. But officially and publicly, yeah, we're still cool, right? And that's a terrible way to have relations with people. That's what we do with God, and that's what's happening here, right? And so, and that's, it's like, I get it, right? You were in Babylon for 70 years, I get it. But on a spiritual level, hey, God, you are God and we are your people, that is a really that's a broken relationship there, and it's not good, and that's kind of what's happening here. And so for us, as we're kind of processing this, what does this mean? I think the first thing is we have to address, because I know I feel it, and so I'm assuming there's at least one or two of you who kind of feel this way too. But sometimes we can look at how God dealt with the Israelites and with using Assyria, using Babylon, and it's and we sit there and think, was this necessary? isn't this a bit harsh? I mean, to have an entire, like, another empire come and just conquer and devastate the whole land, like really? Like, God, couldn't you have done it a little bit differently? Like, why did it have to be so bad, right? And I get that. That's a fair question. And I struggle with that question as I, read this all throughout my life. I always struggle with, man, like, God, like, I know, like, yeah, there's disobedience. I get that, right? But just, like, you had to do it this way, right? And so if you feel that way, or you've thought about it this way, I think that's fine. But I think the reason why it's not. I think what's happening is we are looking at it the wrong way. We're looking at it through one lens, and we're looking at it, and there's a better way to look at it. And I'm going to do this with like a real world example. Okay, so there are students. Not here, but I'm sure if anybody goes to school, you know of students like this, who just continually get in trouble at school. Like they get in trouble, and then like nothing ever changes, right? And it could happen at a young age, right? Like in grade school, it starts to happen, and it just gets worse and worse. And like clearly, like the parents and family life is not addressing this. So it just continually happens, and schools don't know what to do because their policies can't really like deal with this, right? Because you can't have teachers put a hand on a kid, right? So if a kid like acts out in school or goes nuts and it starts something, the teacher can't actually like tackle the kid to the ground and be like, hey, we got to stop this, right? Because you got lawsuits and that kind of stuff, right? And so what happens is, these students, when they continue to kind of have these behavioral issues, really cause a problem for the school, and the schools just don't have the tools to really deal with some of these, right? Like suspensions don't really help because the kid's like, yeah, that sounds good. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in school, so suspend me. That's a day off for me, right? And it's like, okay, in-school suspension. They're like, okay, I don't have to go to class. I don't want to be there either, right? And so what do you do, right? And what do you do? Expel the kid, right? It takes a lot to expel a kid, but even then, the kid's like, sounds good. I didn't want to be here, right? And so what do you do with those situations, right? I mean, you almost have, like, in some of those situations, it's really tough because you don't, like, punish the kid. You almost have to, like, take everybody around him and like remove them from the situation and be like, okay, just like let them be in that class, like having, like freaking out and that kind of stuff. We're going to deal with this, right? And so there's different things, right? It's more complicated than how I'm presenting it, right? But like different techniques and like positive reinforcement, really, like a lot of the mental health stuff work for some of these students, right? And it's great, but it doesn't work for all of them. And at some point, you kind of sit back and you just realize that some kind of disciplinary action or whatever has to be so unpleasant for that student that it kind of puts them in a position to kind of make decisions of like, maybe I should change, or maybe I should at least think about working with the authorities in my life to kind of get by, right? And I'm totally not advocating like corporal punishment in schools and that kind of stuff, right? What I'm saying is sometimes you have these situations where the school doesn't have the tools to handle certain cases that are really, really difficult. And it's really sad because when you start to see this, you start to see the long term, like it's happening for a long time, and you sit back and you're like, oh no, like this student, if something doesn't change, like they're probably going to end up in jail or dead, right? Because you see the progression of like grade school, behavioral issues to middle school, and you're like, hey, this is not going to get better. This is only getting worse. And you just realize that like what's happening with this student is in a sense, not literally, like a death sentence, right? This student's life at such a young age is already projected to be like not over, but like what is this person going to become as an adult, right? Right? Obviously things can change, but you just realize there's super long-term like issues here, and that something has to happen, and it probably is pretty unpleasant, but it has to happen, or we're just going to get to this, right? I use that example because I think this is what's happening to God's people. And it's happening over hundreds of years where God is like trying, he's like using a punishment here, he's using discipline, and the people are just continually rejecting the Lord. And I think what's happening is God sees this, and he's like, and God in his infinite wisdom, right, understands that like, if this is my people, if they're going to, be the people of God, like something's got to happen, right? If we look at the situation that way, if we start looking at our lives that way, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, that's unfortunate, but probably necessary, right? And so I think that's, before we can get into like for us, like that's how we have to look at this, right? Because this is not happening like, over a couple years. This is happening over hundreds of years, and it's just getting worse and worse, and God has to come and do something really severe, right? And once you see that, you're like, oh, okay, God has a plan here. It's still not pleasant. It's never pleasant, right? But at least we can understand, like, oh, that's what's going on, right? So I say that because I struggled with this for many decades of just like every time I get through these sections, it's just like, and even with this understanding, it's not like I'm like, oh, I'm happy, let's move on, right? It's still tough, but I think this is kind of how, this is the way we got to work through Scripture honestly and then thoughtfully to kind of really get at the heart of what it means for us, okay? And so the first thing that what does it mean for us is this. We are the Israelites. When we read this and when we're seeing this, we are not bystanders, innocent bystanders who are like, oh yeah, those Israelites, oh no, God had to do this, or like, we look at these situations in our schools like, oh yeah, that kid, the only thing we can do is military school or whatever, right? No, it's not that. We have to understand, oh no, we're the Israelites here. We are the ones who have turned away from God, and we are the ones that God is calling us back to return over and over and over again, and we are the ones who are always turning away. This is what the sinful nature does, right? When you think about like the Bible where it talks about like, oh, you have a sinful nature, this is that sinful nature. It's like even as we're trying to walk with the Lord, that sinful nature just affects us and drags us down. It doesn't mean the sinful nature like it's not an excuse for rejecting God or sinning. It's just, this is what it does to a person, right? And for humanity, there is no hope without some kind of divine intervention, right? And that gets us to the last part, right? It's simply, we need Jesus, right? God's solution to sin, right, is ultimately Jesus, right? All of these laws are kind of God's way of showing us that we cannot do it on our own, right? Because that's our natural instinct. We'll change. And God's like, it's not as simple as that. This goes way deeper. And God's like, okay, all right, try it. I'm going to give you the law. This is what you got to live up to. And over, right? Isaiah, the book of Isaiah ultimately points to Jesus. That's why there's so many like great messianic passages here, right? It points to Jesus, right? It's pointing, all of this is happening, right? The Assyrians, the Babylonians, the continual rejection of the Lord, it's all pointing to Jesus, right? I just want to read some of the messianic verses, and we'll kind of start closing with this, right? Chapter 9, verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. As you read that, you're like, it's Jesus, right? And again, this is Isaiah. This is written, so long ago before Jesus, right? Chapter 11, verse 1. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. And then chapter 42, verse 3. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice, right? And so, yes, like Isaiah is prophesying harsh judgment on Israel, right? Like that is definitely in there. And that's because the sin and its damages are real and serious, right? But what we have to do is we have to remember and focus on the fact that God's solution to it is not these temporary judgments, right? It's not that. It's that his solution to sin is not like religion, and these are the things you need to do. If you don't do it, God's going to punish you. Like that's how we often look at it, and that's like the most terrible way to look at a faith, right? But his solution, God's solution, is a person, and that person is Jesus, right? And once we have that mindset, right, our faith becomes joyful instead of like depressing, right? So if you're sitting there and you're like, I've been going to church for a long time, and honestly, I'm always bored and a little bit depressed at church because I'm told that I'm a sinful person and that I need Jesus, right? That perspective is really self-focused, and we're like, oh, all right, I guess I have to, I don't want to go to hell, so I'll raise my hand for this, right? Like that is not the relationship God calls us to live, right? God is saying, no, like don't look at yourself. Look at the solution, which is Jesus, and when we focus there, then it's like, so that's it. It's not about what I do; it's about who is here to save me and redeem me, right? And all of a sudden, that gives us joy. That makes us want to celebrate because it's not about our weaknesses; it's about God's love and God's strength. Right? And so for us today is really the only action step you have is how do you respond to that message, right? Are you going to respond with, okay, I'm still a horrible person, or I'm a sinner, right? Or are you going to respond by receiving Jesus, by receiving this grace and this love and not worrying about what you can't do, but by receiving God's grace and love and just celebrating? Like that's what being a Christian is about. It's about somebody who just realizes that and be like, yeah, no, things are awesome because I have Jesus. Not, I'm a sinner, so I have to go with Jesus. Okay? So let me pray for us.